The vast command chamber of the alien battlecruiser, the Jorkath, hummed with tense energy as Galactic Commander Vor'zul scanned the council arrayed before him. Their faces reflected skepticism, arrogance, and the unshakable belief in the Empire's superiority. A belief that Vor'zul, once proud and unwavering, now found himself doubting after witnessing the humans firsthand. He felt a twist of fear in his gut, something foreign, unsettling. Commander Vor'zul, a high-ranking admiral, sneered, his scales flashing with disdain. Are we to believe you've been swayed by these primitives? Vor'zul's hands clenched around the data crystal in his grip. I have been on Earth. I have seen what they are capable of. And I assure you, he took a deep breath, letting his voice drop, they are not to be underestimated. The council murmured, some dismissive, others beginning to waver. The Empire had never faced a foe they could not crush, yet Vor'zul's voice held a gravity that made even the proudest among them pause. Allow me to explain, he continued, his tone brooking no further interruption. When I landed on Earth, I believed their technology inferior, their soldiers undisciplined. But I was wrong. They may lack our weaponry, our interstellar fleets, but they possess something dangerous. The council members leaned forward, some curious, others rolling their eyes. Vor'zul ignored their skepticism. He knew they needed to hear this, needed to understand, for their own survival. Humans have a will to survive that borders on madness, Vor'zul said, his eyes distant as he recalled the battlefields he'd witnessed. They fight with a desperation I have never seen in any species. When cornered, they do not surrender, they find ways to adapt, to strike back with any weapon at their disposal. I watched them take down our ground units with nothing more than primitive explosives and, he hesitated, still amazed by the memory, sheer grit. A younger officer laughed. Commander, is this a joke? They have sticks and stones, we have plasma cannons. What could they possibly do to harm us? Vor'zul slammed his fist on the podium, his voice rising with uncharacteristic anger. You did not see it. You did not stand there as their forces, outnumbered and outgunned, threw themselves at our soldiers. They think in ways we do not, they sacrifice without hesitation, and they have a level of ingenuity that defies logic. They fight as if they have nothing to lose. Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the hushed murmur of distant machinery. A few council members began to look uneasy. And it is not just their soldiers, Vor'zul continued, his voice softer but no less intense. Their scientists, their engineers, they adapt at an alarming rate. They understand weakness and they exploit it ruthlessly. Within days, they had modified their weaponry to counter our armor. Their pilots learned our maneuvers and anticipated our strikes. It was unnatural. A veteran commander on the council crossed his arms, staring at Vor'zul with narrowed eyes. What are you suggesting, Vor'zul? That we negotiate with them? That we treat these savages as equals? Vor'zul shook his head. I am suggesting we avoid conflict at all costs. I am suggesting that we do not awaken a force we cannot contain. The humans, they see war as a crucible, a means of improvement. We would become nothing more than a training ground for their evolution. One council member, an advisor who had been silent until now, spoke up. Commander, this fear of yours, is it truly warranted? Perhaps you overestimate them. They are mortal, just like us. They can be defeated. Vor'zul locked eyes with the advisor, a heavy silence stretching between them. They do not fear death as we do, he said quietly. I have seen humans willingly walk into certain death if it meant they could harm their enemies. And they do it with a terrifying resolve, as if it is their very purpose. The council shifted uneasily. Some exchanged glances, others fidgeted. This was not the portrait of a species they were prepared to face. Before anyone could respond, a shrill alarm filled the chamber. The council members froze, a ripple of shock spreading among them as a holographic display materialized in the center of the room. The image showed a small fleet of human ships, approaching fast. Their weapon systems were primed, signatures flaring as they prepared to strike. Impossible, the admiral muttered. They have no technology to reach us here. They have found a way, Vor'zul interrupted, his voice resigned. This is exactly what I warned you of. they adapt faster than we comprehend. A panicked voice came over the intercom. Commander, human vessels are targeting our forward defense array. Shields are failing. The council erupted in chaos, shouts and commands filling the chamber as they scrambled to understand how their impenetrable fortress was suddenly vulnerable. The human ships, smaller, crude by Empire standards, moved with deadly precision, darting through the Empire's defenses, exploiting every weakness with brutal efficiency. Vor'zul took a breath, his worst fears materializing before his eyes. He turned to the council, his voice cutting through the commotion. This is not just war to them. To humans, this is survival. They fight as if each of them holds the fate of their species in their hands. Explosions rippled through the hull, and Vor'zul watched as their mighty empire, their fleets of advanced ships, their impenetrable shields, began to falter against the humans' relentless assault. The council stared in horror as one of their warships exploded in a brilliant burst of fire, reduced to debris by an enemy that shouldn't have been able to breach their defenses. This is why I warned you, Vor'zul said, his tone heavy with the weight of inevitable tragedy. You think of them as savages, but they see us as a threat. And a cornered animal fights with all it has. With grim finality, he turned to the viewport, watching as the humans advanced, their ships closing in, relentless and unyielding. The Empire's downfall, he realized, would not come from a more advanced civilization, but from an indomitable will to survive, from a force that would fight until nothing remained. And as he stood there, bracing himself for the end, Vor'zul could only wonder what he might have done differently, what they all might have done, to avoid this cataclysmic war against humanity. The vibrations of the bombardment rocked the chamber, causing a few council members to stumble. Vor'zul watched the scene unfold with a mixture of dread and awe. The humans, whom his empire had dismissed as insignificant, had become a force capable of dismantling their defenses and instilling fear in even the most hardened commanders. Commander Vor'zul. A junior officer burst into the chamber, his face pale with terror. The humans have breached the outer hull. They're advancing toward the bridge. Vor'zul turned to the council, his gaze piercing. You wanted to see the humans for yourselves. Well, here they come. And make no mistake, they are here for blood. The council members exchanged panicked glances, realizing too late that they'd miscalculated. A few reached for weapons, their hands shaking. This was no longer a distant threat but a storm they could no longer control. Prepare our troops for close combat, Vor'zul ordered, his voice steady, though he knew the odds were against them. Seal off the lower decks, reinforce the barricades. Do everything you can to slow them down. The admiral scoffed, still unwilling to fully accept the situation. Commander, these are mere humans. We have elite soldiers, trained for any encounter. A deafening blast interrupted him as the chamber doors buckled. Dust and smoke filled the air, and Vor'zul saw shapes moving through the haze. The humans had arrived, their silhouettes backlit by flames and explosions. Without hesitation, the human soldiers surged forward. They wore no advanced armor, wielded no plasma weapons, yet they moved with terrifying purpose. Their eyes were fierce, their movements precise, each one acting as if driven by a mission larger than themselves. The admiral, caught off guard, raised his weapon too late. A human soldier, swift and unyielding, struck him down with a single, brutal shot. The council members scrambled, their composure shattered, as chaos erupted in the chamber. Vor'zul, weapon in hand, stood his ground. He fired, taking down a few attackers, but he knew it was futile. The humans moved with a fluidity that defied their training, coordinating with a wordless understanding, exploiting every weak spot they found. One of the human soldiers, a woman with a fierce, determined gaze, locked eyes with Vor'zul. In that moment, he understood. She didn't see him as an alien commander, a being from another star, she saw him as an enemy standing between her and survival. There was no fear in her eyes, only the cold fire of purpose. She charged at him, their clash echoing through the chamber as he blocked her strike, barely holding her at bay. They struggled, each testing the other's strength, each determined to emerge victorious. Vor'zul had faced countless foes, but never one like her. Her movements were relentless, as if each strike carried the weight of her entire species. With a swift move, she disarmed him, pressing him back against the wall, a weapon leveled at his chest. Vor'zul held up his hands, his breathing heavy. He looked into her eyes, and for a brief moment, he saw the resolve that had driven her, the unyielding will that refused to surrender. "Why?" he rasped, his voice barely audible over the sounds of battle. "Why do you fight with such madness?" She tilted her head, her gaze cold and unflinching. "Because we have no other choice. You invaded us, thought you could break us. But humanity is unbreakable." Vor'zul felt the weight of her words. Humanity had faced countless challenges, endured hardships he could hardly imagine. They fought not just to win, but to survive, to protect what they held dear, and they would do so with a fervor that bordered on the insane. She released him, stepping back, her weapon still trained on him. "Tell your empire," she said, her voice filled with quiet intensity, "that humanity is not theirs to conquer. We will resist. We will fight until there's nothing left. And if you come for us again, we will show you the true cost of war." Vor'zul nodded, humbled and shaken. He could see now what he hadn't understood before. Humanity's strength lay not in their technology or their numbers, but in their indomitable spirit, a force that no empire could ever hope to contain. As the human soldiers withdrew, leaving the battered council chamber in silence, Vor'zul knew that the empire had made a fatal mistake. This was a foe that would never back down, a species that would fight with everything they had until their last breath. He looked around at his fallen comrades, at the smoldering remains of their once mighty defenses, and he realized that the galaxy would have to reckon with humanity. They were not just another species to conquer, they were a force of nature, relentless and unstoppable. With grim resolve, Vor'zul turned to the council members who had survived, their expressions hollow and fearful. "We must end this war," he said, his voice filled with a certainty he hadn't felt before. "Or humanity will end it for us, and the empire will fall." And as he left the shattered chamber, he knew that his plea would not be for peace alone, but for survival, a plea to avoid the wrath of a species that had been underestimated for far too long. Vor'zul walked through the corridors of the Jor'Kaf, his steps heavy with the weight of a decision he'd never imagined he'd have to make. The once proud flagship of the Empire was now scarred and battered, its walls scorched from the recent human assault. Here and there, soldiers and medics rushed past him, tending to the wounded and clearing debris, but every face he saw bore the same expression, fear. In the Empire's long history of conquest, they'd rarely encountered species capable of true resistance, let alone a fight that could bring the mighty Empire to its knees. But the humans, with their primitive technology and reckless bravery, had exposed a vulnerability Vor'zul could no longer deny. He entered the ship's command center, where a handful of his officers were assessing the damage. Their expressions shifted from surprise to relief when they saw him, as if his mere presence could restore order. Vor'zul took his place at the helm, the room falling silent as every eye turned to him. "Commander," one of his senior officers spoke up, his voice strained. "The council, they won't listen. They still believe we can win." Vor'zul shook his head. "The council is clinging to an illusion. They believe we are invincible because they have never known true defeat. But today, they have seen what we are up against." His gaze swept over his officers, each one battered yet still loyal. "We must end this war, but we cannot rely on the council to act. This time, we will take matters into our own hands." One of the officers, a young lieutenant who had always been fiercely loyal to the Empire, looked hesitant. "Commander, are you suggesting defying the council? They will see it as treason." Vor'zul met the lieutenant's gaze, his voice resolute. "If that is what it takes to prevent the destruction of our empire, then yes. The council has become blinded by arrogance. But I have seen the truth, and I will not lead my people to ruin." The officers exchanged uncertain glances, the weight of their commander's decision settling over them. Finally, the lieutenant nodded, his expression hardening with newfound resolve. "We stand with you, Commander." "Good," Vor'zul said, relief mingling with determination. "Then let us send a message to the humans. We will negotiate for peace. I will personally deliver our terms, and I will ensure that we do not provoke them further." The officers moved into action, transmitting a signal to the human fleet and awaiting a response. Minutes passed, each second stretching like an eternity as they waited for the humans' reply. Finally, the message came through, a human officer appearing on the screen with an intense expression. He was clearly wary, his eyes scanning the alien faces on the bridge with suspicion. "I am Commander Vor'zul of the Galactic Empire," he began, bowing his head slightly in a show of respect. "I come with a plea for peace. We seek to end this war before it consumes us both." The human officer remained silent, his gaze assessing. Then he spoke, his voice calm yet firm. "Why the change of heart, Commander? Your empire didn't hesitate to invade us. You didn't hesitate to kill our people." Vor'zul's shoulders slumped slightly as he nodded. "You're right. We thought you were weak, that you would be easy to conquer. But we were wrong. We underestimated you, and I have seen firsthand the strength of your resolve. Your people fight with a passion that our empire cannot match. To continue this war would only lead to mutual destruction." The human officer was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed, as if weighing a heavy burden. "I will pass your message to our leaders. But know this, if your empire does not honor its word, we will not hesitate to fight again. And next time, we won't stop until your entire fleet is nothing but debris." Vor'zul nodded solemnly. "I understand. And I will ensure that my people honor this agreement. We both have too much to lose." The communication ended, and Vor'zul looked to his officers. "Prepare the ship for departure. We will return to the Empire and present our case for peace." Hours later, the Jorkat broke through the human defensive lines, heading back toward Imperial territory. As they approached their homeworld, Vor'zul could feel the tension among his crew, an unspoken fear that the Council might reject his plea. They were risking everything on the hope that reason would prevail. Upon landing, Vor'zul and his officers made their way to the Council chamber, the Grand Hall now shrouded in an air of grim anticipation. The Council members, bruised but not broken, sat in silence as Vor'zul entered, his head held high despite the murmurs of doubt that followed him. He stood before them, facing the skeptical stares of the Empire's most powerful leaders. His voice was calm, steady, yet filled with conviction as he addressed them. "Councillors, I have seen the humans up close. I have fought against them. And I am here to tell you that if we continue this war, we will lose. Humanity is unlike any enemy we have ever faced. They fight with a fury, a resolve that defies reason. They will not stop, and they will not yield." One councillor scoffed, his voice dripping with scorn. "Commander Vor'zul, are you truly suggesting that we, the Galactic Empire, bow down to a race as primitive as humanity?" Vor'zul's gaze was unwavering. "I am suggesting that we survive. If we continue on this path, we will bring about our own extinction. Humanity will not simply surrender, they will fight until there is nothing left of us." The councillors looked among themselves, some faces hardened, others betraying uncertainty. One of them, a senior councillor who had served the Empire for centuries, leaned forward, his expression softened by age and wisdom. "Commander Vor'zul," he said, his voice grave. "If we agree to peace, the Empire's reputation will suffer. We will be seen as weak." Vor'zul took a step forward, his voice passionate. "Better to be seen as weak and survive than to cling to pride and perish. We do not need to fear humanity, but we must respect them. They have earned it." Silence filled the chamber, heavy and tense. The councillors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the senior councillor stood, his gaze settling on Vor'zul with an intensity that carried the weight of his decision. "Very well, Commander. We will send envoys to the humans and offer peace. But know this, if you are wrong, if this truce fails, the Empire will hold you responsible." Vor'zul inclined his head, accepting the risk. "Understood, Councillor. I accept the consequences. But I assure you, this is the only path forward." As he left the chamber, he felt the weight of relief and uncertainty pressing down on him. He had risked everything, his position, his reputation, even his life, for this fragile hope of peace. But as he looked out at the stars beyond, he knew he had made the right choice. The war with humanity had taught him a lesson he would never forget. Sometimes, the true strength of an empire lay not in its weapons or its conquests, but in its ability to recognize a foe worth respecting, and to make peace with a power that refused to be conquered.